Please rewind this cassette.
What do you say about Tim Burton? Some people love him, others hate him. You hear his early work, it was good, and then he dropped off. Or it's something about how he was always bad, and it took a while for everyone to catch on. I suppose we don't need to go into all that. For now. I'm a Pee-wee and Beetlejuice kind of guy myself. And this man's filmography is one film so good that I can't believe he made it. A true gem doesn't come around very often, but when it does, it takes us back to why we love the arts, why we love cinema. Director Ed Wood had a cult status for a good reason. His movies are laugh riots and truly unique. You'll never really see anything like Glenn or Glenda. I think making a movie about him was such a good idea because the general public didn't know his story very well. Basically, Ed Wood wasn't important enough for people to care how he was handled in this movie. So unlike some other biopics that suffer from hero worship and lackluster narrative choices, Ed Wood is a very well-written, cleverly executed movie. The script was written by the guys who did Man on the Moon. I like that movie too. Burton has often been criticized for his storytelling shortcomings, but Ed Wood makes a good argument that Burton isn't a bad storyteller, just only as good as the material he's given. Despite his wonderful visual style, Burton could never elevate the material. If he had a mediocre screenplay, it was probably going to be a mediocre movie. But occasionally he would get something like Big Fish, or he would get to work with Paul Reubens on Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and he could match the material. Ed Wood is the kind of movie that shuts up any critic towards the filmmaker. This movie really works because even though Ed Wood is a bad director, he's presented as a very happy and optimistic guy. I'm not the world's biggest Johnny Depp fan, but sometimes he can really surprise me. For instance, I love his performance in What's Eating Gilbert Grape, Dead Man. And as Ed Wood, Depp is charismatic, funny, and surprisingly sweet-natured. You can really see why he became a movie star. Any low-budget filmmaker can relate to this movie. Shooting without permits. No money for multiple takes. No time to do anything right. You can't afford real actors, so you get people who are willing to do it for cheap. You know, you can still be pragmatic in those situations, and you have to make compromises with any film, but when you don't have any money, it goes beyond the point of making compromises to where you're just settling for bad things. And that's when you have to get creative. So when you see a bad movie like that, typically it's because the person making it wasn't creative enough to come up with a solution that would have actually been interesting. They just go with what they have. This movie's trying to show us how hard it is to make a good movie. That it actually takes talent, and it's hard work, that you actually have to put effort into what you're doing. So many things have to come together for any kind of sort of success in the arts. The group of freaks that Ed befriends along the way is right up Tim Burton's alley, but perhaps because this film is slightly more adult than most of his other work, I find these characters to be more human out of any of his other films, with maybe Beetlejuice coming in second. I mean, Tim Burton's always played with fairy tale meets harsh reality, but that balance has never been so perfectly handled as it is in this one. They seem like people you might know, and all of them are dreamers. Someone with passion like Ed Wood can convince others to follow them, because living out their dream with them is almost as good as experiencing your own dream coming true. Ed Wood becomes close friends with legendary actor Bela Lugosi, played by Martin Landau. In most movies, this would either be totally comedic or very sad. Ed Wood is the kind of movie that mixes those two things together. So Martin Landau went on to win an Oscar. The design of this movie is brilliant, giving us a look and feel of a movie from that era, but still very much being a film made in the 90s, which I consider a decade that felt like the 70s. It was like a new era of new Hollywood. We also have to talk about how Ed Wood liked to wear women's clothing. Not only is this another comedy goldmine, but it also helps make Ed feel like an outsider himself, which I think all artists feel like outsiders. Why this matters is that on some level, it just makes him more relatable, I guess. That weird, eccentric nature to him in this film just makes him more relatable, that maybe he did have something to say about this stuff. He just didn't know how to articulate it to, or make it come across in his art. He wasn't talented enough, or he didn't have enough skills to really present these things well enough, but he just loved making movies so much he didn't care. It's easy to look into something from an outside perspective and think that if you could live that life out, if you could do that thing, then you would be happier. It would be better than the life you're currently living. Ed doesn't really want to be a filmmaker because he's some hungry artist that has a story to tell. He loves the idea of being a director, of being part of Hollywood. He's obsessed with the posters and genres, but never wants to flesh out his story or characters. He seems more happy to just be getting Bela Lugosi than giving Bela Lugosi a really good role. Ed's heart's in the right place, but he's not taking the job seriously enough to do quality work. When people point out an obvious flaw in a take, Ed makes up some crazy excuse to explain why it doesn't matter. The movie has a nice romance to it, though. It's sort of like Purple Rose of Cairo or Midnight in Paris. Burton clearly loves everything about what he's doing, but he knows not to spoil something good. Bill Murray gets to shine, but so does everyone else. The ensemble is so well cast that it's hard to imagine anyone else playing any of these roles. The black and white cinematography is just gorgeous. See, Ed Wood is showing us that failure is only a matter of perspective. If you view something you made as a success, say it's close to the movie you saw in your head, or it's the kind of movie you wanted to see, then it can be worth it. Of course everyone wants and loves box office success, critical acclaim, and the chance to make even bigger projects. In reality, though, most of us aren't genius artists who just haven't been discovered yet. As Salieri says at the end of Amadeus, most of us are just mediocre. But that doesn't mean you have to be unhappy. The work that goes into making the art can be just as rewarding, just as fulfilling as the final project. What comes out isn't always what matters, sometimes it's the journey. The experience can either be a prison or a playground of your own construction. Getting to play pretend with a bunch of other adults is a pretty cool thing. The movie's also telling us that following your dreams is worth it, no matter the outcome. I'm not really sure if that's true, but damn if Ed Wood doesn't make a convincing argument. Ed Wood went on to win 2 Academy Awards for Best Makeup, Best Supporting Actor. It was a box office bomb, but has since gained a cult following, sort of like the filmmaker himself. Many critics consider it to be one of Burton's best films, if not his best. Hopefully this movie helps young filmmakers prepare themselves for criticism. Your art is like your child, and you can be very sensitive about someone attacking it. Ed accepts his failures and keeps moving forward. He loves making movies so much that he puts it all on the line over and over again. I think this movie deserves to have comparisons to the great documentary American Movie. I hope I can talk about that at some point. Fellini's 8.5, Truffaut's Day for Night. I don't think it's quite like at Sunset Boulevard levels of a commentary on Hollywood and the industry, but this is still a brilliant minor masterwork. And I think it's very important for young filmmakers to watch this. It's hard to say things in this review that weren't covered by Red Letter Media in their review. I think they kind of did a perfect review. But I would also recommend watching Siskel and Ebert's review of this movie, because when Gene Siskel is really happy and gives a really positive review, I think he's one of the finest film critics we ever had. And I think he's totally on point with this. He tells a story about a producer who used to applaud at the end of every movie because he knew how hard it was to make a movie. Making something good isn't easy. You know, if you're having a lot of fun and everyone's enjoying themselves and you're getting to make something with your friends and all that, it's a great job, but at the end of the day, you still have to work. And you'll hear this from a lot of artists that I think people confuse the entertainment, the fame with it, the glamour with the actual process. The process is something that can be very stressful. And I think Ed Wood shows that Ed Wood is kind of ignoring how stressful and disastrous these things are, because he's just this positive, like, oh boy, oh golly gee kind of guy. But it's terrific. That's a terrific approach to take, because the message that's underlying there still lingers, despite the tone of the movie and the performances, the pitch of the movie kind of being played as a movie from that time. So it just kind of shows you maybe that even movies from that time were giving us a very false sense of reality, that what people were actually going through in the real world was probably a lot more harsh, or probably closer to something like what Mad Men presents the early 60s being like, or coming off of the 50s. This masterpiece has enough good things in it for several movies. Its influenced works such as The Disaster Artist, the book, and the movie, and has been embraced by many within the industry. Tim Burton isn't for everyone, but neither is Ed Wood. I wonder if Burton saw a bit of himself in this character, or maybe it was all just serendipity, I don't know, but I feel like one reason this film is kind of greater, or feels a little bit more like it has artistic integrity compared to some of other Burton works, is because maybe he's being a little bit more honest about himself, and seeing himself in this eccentric guy who surrounds himself with sort of weirdos, with people from his own little circus. which I think is perfect. And it sucks because Tim Burton was really a director in the 80s and early 90s that really looked like he was going on to a legendary career. And it's not that he isn't a legend, but, people like Kevin Smith will both praise him and then, criticize him, especially with the whole Superman Lives project. But I think Burton probably got a little overrated at one point, but now I feel like people have gone in the opposite direction where they're too harsh on Tim Burton, and they ignored that he did make some really good movies early on in his career. I mean, don't get me wrong, for me, a lot of stuff hasn't held up well. Like, I don't like Sleepy Hollow anymore. And it's a gorgeous movie. The cinematography's great. I think it's actually got his best action scenes. But a lot of those films that I used to like when I was a kid, they haven't aged very well. On the other hand, though, stuff like Edward Scissorhands or Ed Wood, it's funny that two characters named Ed, Johnny Depp, I never connected that. Huh. So the Tim Burton Johnny Depp movies I like have Ed in them. Maybe that's where he's been messing up, but Johnny Depp should have been called Ed in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Ed Wonka. This movie ends with Ed premiering Plan 9 from Outer Space, a movie that has been called the worst film ever made. In this movie, this is shown as a successful moment. Ed getting the girl and saying this is the one he'll be remembered for. We then find out that Ed ended up directing softcore porno and died at a young age. Once again, the harsh reality coming into this fairy tale. Sort of like how Edward Scissorhands is showing us suburbia, also mixed with the fairy tale. This is a thing that's in most of Tim Burton's movies. I love that the harshness of reality is never ignored in this fantasy, and the impact is better because of it. The movie lingers because of it. Some say that tenacity is more important than talent, and I think Ed Wood is a nice tribute to that. I really think that's what the film is about. There's some fine world building here, and real movie magic. Witty and handled with a soft touch. I think this is one of the best films of the 90s. And I still think to this day it's underrated. Even if it does have a cult following, I still think people haven't quite appreciated this film enough. It is Tim Burton's best movie, and it's a masterpiece. I don't say that lightly. It's a masterpiece from presentation to storytelling to performance to just the idea of it and how everything came together. It really is a magical movie experience. But maybe that's just how I see it. Maybe that's just my perspective. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it sucks, and that's kind of the point. So please, if you haven't seen Ed Wood, watch it. If you have seen it, watch it again. I think it holds up to repeat viewings. Tons of great dialogue I didn't go into, tons of funny set pieces, all sorts of things to talk about. But like I said, maybe it sucks. You never really know, do you?